Hi everybody, thanks for joining us on the latest virtual tour of the Missouri Botanical Garden. I'm Cassidy, I'm here with Christina, and today we're going to talk about witch hazels, which is the plant that you can see in front of me here that's in bloom. So witch hazels, or Malice, is a genus of woody shrubs and small trees that has only has a small handful of species, about half of which are native to North America, and then there's one apiece that are native to China and Japan. And they're actually a very popular plant to hybridize as well. So we're standing in one of the bigger parts of the garden's witch hazel collection, and this is one of those hybrids. This is Harry, and we're going to kind of walk you through and show you some of the differences in the species and the hybrids, and talk a little bit about witch hazel, which is one of the few things that's blooming outside right now that you can come and see when you're here at the garden. So we'll kind of take a walk and show you what we come across. So the garden has something like 200 or so different specimens of witch hazel. The Daylily Garden, which we're in here, is, as I mentioned, is one of the larger places to see the witch hazels. Some other good spots are outside the perimeter of the children's garden, and then in the English woodland garden as well. And actually, our last virtual tour, we highlighted one witch hazel in particular that was sitting right there on the edge of the path in the English woodland garden. There was a Chinese witch hazel, and up here is another Chinese witch hazel. So this is Gold Edge, and you can see these tiny little yellow petals. And that's one thing you'll notice as we stop and point out the different plants. If the one that we started on, those petals were close to an inch long, and here they're maybe a quarter of an inch. So petal length, petal color, and even bloom time are things that can be different. But this is the Chinese species, or a hybrid of the Chinese species. Gold Edge is the cultivar name. And if we come over here, this is Malice Virginiana, and this is one of the two species that are native to Missouri. And Malice Virginiana, which is also called common witch hazel, actually blooms in the late fall and into early winter. So this is what's left over after this particular plant bloomed late last year. So you're seeing these little bracts and things, but there's no petals, and this one is done. And actually, the common witch hazel ties into how most of you may have heard of witch hazel before. Even if you're not familiar with the plant, you might be familiar with the medicinal product that comes from witch hazel. So there's a distillation that's made of the leaves and the bark and some of the twigs to get this medicinal product, and it's used as a topical. You can rub it on your skin if you have like bug bites or little sort of small burns and cuts. It's the kind of thing you can pick up at any kind of drugstore. And so this plant here is what is used to make the witch hazel that you might have at home in your medicine cabinet. And so there's just a little connection between the plant itself and then what, other than enjoying the flowers and its natural beauty, that we actually use the product itself. So that comes from common witch hazel, which is one of the two Missouri native witch hazels, and we'll find the other species that's native to Missouri as we kind of walk along. But yeah, that's done. That would have wrapped up its bloom late last year, but both species bloom when most other plants are not in bloom. So we're walking past a number of witch hazels right now, and here's one that you can kind of see starting to peek through, and kind of one of the features with these plants is they're very opportunistic. So it is a cold gray day. This plant, despite being on the verge of wanting to bloom, probably is taking some cues from the environment and saying, I don't know that I really want to open up today and expend the energy to open up my flowers, when the pollinators that it would be opening up for are probably, like the rest of you, hanging out inside trying to stay warm. So on warmer sunny days like we were going to have coming up here on Wednesday, there's a good chance that many more of these buds will be open, and the other bonus of witch hazels, besides being one of the few outdoor blooms, is they smell fantastic. So you'll get a lot more of that smell on a warm sunny day than you will on a day like today. So we're going to head up here and just show you some more of the specimens that are braving the cold like us to show off some blooms.
This here is another showier one. You can see those longer petals here again. And this one has quite a few blooms on it open today, despite this gloomy weather.
Yeah, and this is another one of those, it's called Malice X intermedia, so it's a cross between two different species of witch hazel and then a cultivar beyond that. So this is Vesna. And you probably noticed as we've walked along the petal color on a lot of these, you get a lot of yellows, oranges, and reds, and various shades of that. So there's that's sort of the spectrum of color that you work with on the flower petals for this genus of plants. So if we keep walking up here, this is the other species that's native to Missouri, Malice vernalis. This particular cultivar is called Christmas cheer, And this is the other species that's native to Missouri, and this is the one that blooms in late winter and into early spring. And one of the clues to that is in the species name itself. Vernalis is from the Latin, it means spring, and so if you think about the vernal equinox or the spring equinox, there's a clue there in that name, species name, that this is one that will bloom in spring. And just behind it here on the ground, I don't know how well you can see it, or maybe we'll move in a little bit, but a lot of these little sprouts starting to come up are actually foliage for the spring crocus. So this little area here is a nice bed for spring crocus, another harbinger of warmer weather to come. And just starting to poke through the soil here, and probably in about another month or so we'll get some nice flowers. They're another plant that will really take off and open up and look really great on warm sunny days, even if it's still cold out. So more signs that it is gonna get warmer soon.
Yes.
So I just wanted to mention, we're talking about witch hazels, and there's a broader family, Hamamelidaceae, that has a number of other different kinds of plants in it. So here's another one. This is a dwarf father Gillah. And it's something that blooms later in the year, but it is a relative of the witch hazel. And so you have this plant here, and then you also have down here this Persian ironwood tree is also in that same family, in the witch hazel family. So you can kind of see from that really small shrub to this nice big tree, to all the witch hazels that we've been pointing out in between. They're all botanically related. I'm not a botanist, I can't tell you what makes them all related, but I know from the name that they are. And I just like the bark on this tree too. This is something, this tree isn't in bloom. It doesn't have any green leaves on it, but there's still a lot to look at and enjoy in the winter with something like this, with this Persian ironwood.
Here we're passing by some more witch hazels that are in bloom today. I see some more sprouts coming up over here. Let's see if we can show those off. Now these look different than the crocus foliage, so this might be daffodils here. Again, another sign that spring is not so far away as it feels on a day like this.
And I like this vantage point because we're looking through one witch hazel with nice red blooms towards the one behind it that has more of an orangey yellow color. And so you get this kind of spectrum of color, and when this collection hits peak, which is usually in a few weeks from now, I mean this whole stretch of space that maybe you've only seen in the summer when the daylilies are in bloom is super colorful, and it's very fragrant. I mean, you can on the right day when this collection's at peak and the sun is out, I mean, you can smell the witch hazel as you're approaching this part of the garden. Now here's another one of the Ozark witch hazel, the Christmas cheer that we were showing off earlier. This is another variety of it. You can see how low to the ground it is and how sweeping those branches are. But then if you look just behind it over here, this is the same species of plant, albeit a different hybrid or cultivar, and you can see this is maybe 15 feet tall. So this gives you a bit of idea of the range that this plant can take between these nice, I mean, this is a small tree in some respects. It has a big trunk, tall, and then you have this one with smaller limbs and much lower to the ground. So there's a lot of range that this plant can cover in terms of size. And this is another Chinese witch hazel.
And this one looks a little bit brighter or more in bloom than that other one did. I'm wondering if it gets a little more light over here, being further away from the wall, that might cause those to be more willing to come out. And the witch hazels have a very interesting seed dispersal method too.
Yeah, so I grabbed these. These are old fruit that I grabbed off of one of the witch hazels here in the Daylily Garden. And you can kind of see, hopefully, where the seeds were located inside the fruit. And witch hazels, their seed dispersal method, when we think of seed dispersal, a lot of times we think of like a bird eats a piece of fruit and flies away and deposits the leftover seed with a little bit of extra fertilizer somewhere else. But in the case of witch hazel, it actually takes on that effort itself. So as the fruit is not particularly edible or desirable for animals to eat, it actually splits open the fruit and shoots the seeds up to 30 feet away. And that process is called explosive dehiscence or forceful dehiscence. And so that's actually the plant's way of taking care of seed dispersal itself, by making sure that any new plants that spring up have the space to grow away from the parent plant. I've always thought if a botanist was going to start a rock group, it would be called explosive dehiscence.
That's pretty good.
That's my dad joke. So we kind of walked up this historic east wall here on one side of the Daylily Garden when we showed you what's in bloom. There's another whole side of that collection on the other side of the path over here. So we can maybe show a few quick highlights of what's in bloom on that side real quick before we end the tour. And I will mention that while this is probably the biggest concentration of witch hazels here at the garden, There are lots of other places to see them in bloom, including the Children's Garden and the English Woodland Garden. But let's take a look at what's blooming over here. On this one. So we've got another Chinese witch hazel. This is another gold edge, which was a cultivar that we saw a little earlier on the tour. And then next to it here is one of the intermedia witch hazels, and you can see those bigger petals, the orange color. And just kind of moving down the line, another cultivar. This one has yellow petals. You can see mostly still just in bud, but a few spots where the petals are starting to come out. And again, something that on a warmer, sunnier day, like we're going to have later this week, where you're going to see a lot more flowers on this plant. This one's called Early Bird.
This one has a nice shape too. If you look at that branch structure. Another very bright yellow.
And you'll notice on a lot of these, so this one in particular, there's no leaves left, and it's all these buds sitting out here exposed to the elements. And as we go along, I'll point out another one, but one of the things that a lot of witch hazels do is they actually hold their leaves for a long time. So witch hazels have really pretty fall color, usually a bright yellow color to their foliage, but then they hold on to those leaves after they've all dried out. And so that's not the case in this particular specimen, but as we walk around you'll see some of these shrubs where they've held on to all those leaves, and the flowers are actually kind of competing with the leaves a bit. And this is kind of what I was talking about. So here's one where it's really held on to all the leaves, and you can see tiny, I mean this plant is in bloom. Not so much on that branch, but down here you can see it's in bloom, but it's held on to these leaves. And that's just another winter interest feature that these plants can have. So it's not just that they flower at a time of year when most other things aren't, but just by virtue of holding on to their leaves, they give you something else to look at other than a bunch of twigs and stems.
And it's a nice coppery brown too.
Yeah, and they can pull off. And so, you know, there's a bit of debate about whether you would, for display purposes, whether you'd want to actually remove the leaves to showcase the flowers or leave them on here. That's something that normally an army of volunteers would help tackle in this area in the winter. And this winter we're just going to go ahead and leave them on here. So that's the case for a few different witch hazels around here. Here's another one without stepping on the daffodils that are coming up here. Where again you have the leaves that are still on, but there's the flowers.
You can see them all the way down the branch here. This has quite a few blooms on it, actually. Here's another one. This one is looking like it's at its peak right now.
This is a cultivar called Rochester. Can you smell it?
I can't right now, but
I suppose such is the downfall of wearing a mask. But again, I think there are some environmental factors that really trigger the additional scent, and it is really fantastic. So these bright petals and the sweet scent that they give off are cues for those pollinators, like our bees that we have here at the garden. That's a cue for those pollinators that there's food to be had this time of year. And so it's really advantageous for everybody on those warm days. And you can, and especially when this whole collection starts to hit its peak in another few weeks, you can come out here and you'll see these plants just covered in bees looking for something to eat.
And that covers most of this space where the collection is the most highly concentrated. So we're going to go ahead and sign off for today. But thank you all for coming along. Let's get one more close-up on these blooms. They just look so great right now. And we'll see you again next time. Bye, everybody.